Thank you for joining me for this bedtime story. My name is Beth, and I will be reading 4 different adventures of the Rainbow Cat. If you enjoy this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. The Rainbow Cat by Rose Fyleman. The first adventure of the Rainbow Cat. There was once a cat which was not in the least like any cat you have ever seen, or I either, for the matter of that. It was a fairy cat, you see, and so you would rather expect it to be different, wouldn't you? It had a violet nose, indigo eyes, pale blue ears, green front legs, a yellow body, orange back legs, and a red tail. In fact, it was colored with all the colors of the rainbow, and on that account it was known as the Rainbow Cat. It lived, of course, in fairyland, and it had all sorts of strange adventures. I'm going to tell you some of them, and I think you will agree with me that it really had a very thrilling time, one way or another. This is the first. The Rainbow Cat was sitting quietly at the door of his house one sunny day. He felt rather bored. Fairyland had been very quiet lately. "I think it is time I set out on a voyage of adventure," he said suddenly. "I shall get fat and stupid if I don't do something of the sort." So he shut up his house, put a notice on the door to say that he hoped to be back some day, if not sooner, and that letters and parcels were to be thrown down the chimney, and started off on his journey with a nice little wallet of assorted oddments tied to his tail, together with a neat parcel containing his party bow and his dancing slippers. "For one never knows," said the Rainbow Cat, "whom one may meet, and it is always well to be prepared for anything." He went on and on until he came to the edge of fairyland, where the clouds begin. "I may as well pay the cloud folk a visit," thought he, and he began climbing up the clouds. The people who live in the clouds are quite pleasant creatures. They don't do very much, but being idle doesn't seem to make them unhappy. They live in splendid cloud palaces that are even more beautiful on the side which can't be seen from earth than on the side which can. Often one may see them drifting across the sky in companies, or driving their pearly chariots, or sailing in their light boats. They live on air, and the only thing they are really afraid of is the thunder giant who, when he gets angry, which he rather often does, goes stamping over the sky, shouting and knocking their houses about. They greeted the Rainbow Cat kindly and were pleased to see him, for he was an old friend, and they were always glad to welcome visitors from fairyland. "You have come just at the right moment," they said. "There is a grand party at the weather clerk's. His eldest son, the North Wind, is to be married today to Princess Pearl, the daughter of the King of the Enchanted Isles." The Rainbow Cat was pleased that he had brought his party bow and his best shoes. His bag of oddments might also come in useful, he thought. It was a wonderful wedding. Everybody went. Among the guests there was even a comet, and comets attend none but the smartest gatherings. The aurora borealis looked magnificent. So did the bride's father, the King of the Enchanted Isles, who was there with his lovely wife, Mother o' Pearl. There were 1 or 2 boors present who had to be asked because they were connected with somebody or other, and another aged relation, Auntie Cyclone, a most disagreeable old lady. But on the whole it was a charming affair. Just as the merriment was at its height, and they were all happily feasting and rejoicing, a friendly swallow came flying in with the news that the thunder giant was tearing across the sky in a terrible rage because a passing trade wind, who was in a hurry, had trodden on his toe. "What shall we do?" said everyone. "He'll spoil the party. He'll upset everything." and they all ran about in great confusion and distress. But the Rainbow Cat remained quite calm. He was a very resourceful creature. He retired under a table and opened his little bag and examined its contents, thinking hard all the time. Presently he came out. "I think I can manage the Thunder Giant," he said. "Pray go on with the party. I will go and meet him and see what can be done." They were all greatly astonished at his courage and coolness, but they were delighted to think that their party might not be spoiled after all, and they crowded round to watch him go sailing off to meet the giant, whose shoutings and mutterings could by this time be clearly heard in the distance. When the Rainbow Cat had gone some way and could already see the giant from afar, he stopped, opened his bag, and drew out a large black cloak. This he put on, pulling the hood well over his ears. He then sat down and appeared to be lost in deep thought. When the Thunder Giant came up, he stood still for a moment to look at this strange object, all alone in the middle of the sky. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" he roared. "I am the celebrated wizard Mupus," replied the cat in a very deep and impressive voice. "Mind my bag, there's black magic in it. I have heard of you, O great Thunder Giant." And he got up and bowed 3 times. The giant felt rather flattered, but he was still very cross, and his foot hurt. "I don't think much of wizards," he said. "What can you do?" "I can tell your thoughts, O giant," was the reply. "Oh-ho!" laughed the giant. "And pray, what am I thinking at this moment, Mr. Mupus?" "That is quite easy," said the Rainbow Cat. "You are thinking how your foot is hurting you, and how you would like to get a hold of the person who trod on your corns." For the cat had heard all this from the swallow. The giant was astonished. "You're a rather wonderful fellow," he said. "It must be useful to be able to do that. Can't you teach me?" "I dare say I might be able to," said the Rainbow Cat. "I'll see if you show any promise. Sit down, please." The giant sat down, and the Rainbow Cat walked 3 times round him, muttering to himself. "Now tell me what I am thinking," said he when he had done. The Thunder Giant sat looking at him rather stupidly. He wasn't a very clever person. "I suppose you're thinking what a fool I look sitting here," he said. "Wonderful, wonderful," said the cat. "You show immense promise, sir. I have never had such an apt pupil." "May I try again?" said the giant, who began to think himself very clever. "Certainly," said the Rainbow Cat. "What am I thinking of now?" The giant tried to put on a very wise look and stared again at the Rainbow Cat with his stupid little eyes. "Beefsteak and onions," he said suddenly. The Rainbow Cat fell back and pretended to be lost in admiration. "Perfectly right," he said. "How did you guess such a thing?" "Oh, it just came into my mind," said the giant modestly. "You know," said the cat seriously, "you ought to cultivate this gift. It's most unusual." "How can I do it?" said the giant eagerly, for he thought it would be very delightful to be able to read people's thoughts, which shows how stupid he was. "Go home," said the cat, "and lie down for a couple of hours. Then take these 3 pink little comfits and lie down for another couple of hours. After that, you may get up and have a cup of tea. But keep very quiet. Before going to bed, eat this other little white comfit, And when you wake up in the morning, you'll be able to read people's thoughts." The giant was all impatience to be gone, but he did not quite forget his manners. "I am very much obliged to you," he said. "Can I do anything for you in exchange, Professor Mupus?" The Rainbow Cat pondered for a moment. "I should like a bit of lightning," he said. "A nice jumpy bit." The giant put his hand in his pocket. "Here's a bundle of it," he said. "If you cut the string, you can have quite a jolly little display at any moment." The cat thanked him, and they parted most amicably. The giant went back to his castle and did as he had been told. Ever since that day, he believes he knows what people are thinking. This makes him feel very superior, and it really doesn't do anyone else any harm. The Rainbow Cat returned to the party with the bundle of lightning stowed carefully away in his bag. Everyone was most grateful for what he had done, and he was quite overwhelmed with attentions. He enjoyed himself very much in Cloudland and stayed for 7 days. At the end of that time, he packed up his little bag and set off once more on his travels, and you shall presently hear what next befell him. The second adventure of the Rainbow Cat. The Rainbow Cat went on and on until at last he came to the country of the tree goblins. The tree goblins are happy people. They live in the trees like birds, though they can't fly. They are indeed very friendly with the birds, and they understand the bird language, so that they are able to send one another messages without any need of the post, which is very convenient. When winter comes, the goblins go and live in their caves underground. It is a great change after the trees, and they are always delighted when spring returns again. There are no animals in Tree Goblin Land, but the Rainbow Cat was an old friend here, too, and was received as kindly as in Cloudland. The tree goblins are rather funny little creatures. They like to keep themselves to themselves, as the saying goes, and there are not even any fairies living in their country. But they are on very friendly terms with the fairy folk, and their principal occupation is making fairy clothes. These are the tiniest, finest little garments imaginable, and they are made of all sorts of pretty things. Spider thread, of course, and moonbeams, and softest silk from silkworms, and flower petals dipped in magic wells so that they cannot fade, and thistledown, and moss velvet, and foam, and lichen. Oh, there is no end to the things that are used to make clothes for the fairies. And when they are finished, the birds carry them to the fairies and bring back orders. Sometimes, when it's a very special occasion, the fairies come to be fitted or to choose the stuffs and the styles, but not often. They are easy to fit and easy to suit, and the birds do the ordering most satisfactorily. The Rainbow Cat liked being in Tree Goblin Land very much indeed. He lived in a beautiful copper beech. When the morning sun shone through the leaves, his little house was filled with a lovely rosy light, which was most pleasing and becoming. Every morning, a chorus of little birds sang songs to him for his delight, and every evening they lulled him to sleep with soft lullabies. They thought him a very grand and beautiful person, and so indeed he was. When he had been in Tree Goblin Land for 2 or 3 days, the chief of the goblins came to see him one morning early. He was in great trouble. The Queen of the Fairies had sent an order for rose-colored shoes, dozens and dozens of pairs. She wanted all the court to wear rose-colored shoes at her next party, and her next party was to take place in 3 days. "We could get the work done," said the chief goblin anxiously. "It isn't that, but we haven't got the material. You see, the roses aren't out yet, There's been a great run on pink lately, and we used up all the pink flowers and all our other stuffs of that color. We've scarcely got an inch of rose color of any kind, and we ought to start at once. It'll take us all our time to get them made. It would be dreadful to disappoint the queen. What are we to do?" The Rainbow Cat was more than willing to help, but he felt that it was a difficult matter. "How soon must you have the stuff?" he asked. "This afternoon would be the very latest," said the goblin. "I'll see what I can do," said the Rainbow Cat. "I have an idea or two. Don't worry, it'll be all right. Meet me here at noon, and I'll let you know what I've done." The chief goblin went away feeling considerably relieved. The Rainbow Cat seemed so wise, just the kind of person to think of something helpful in an emergency. And sure enough, at 12 o'clock, he came to meet the chief of the goblins with a cheerful twinkle in his dark blue eye. "I've been making a few inquiries," he said, "but I want to make sure that my information is correct. Sit down, and let us have a little quiet talk." The chief of the goblins sat down and waited eagerly. He felt more and more hopeful. "Is it true," said the Rainbow Cat, "is it true that the crooked hawthorn tree in the Wishy Glen is very bad-tempered?" "Quite true," said the chief goblin. "Nobody dares go near him. He's such a cross, cantankerous creature. Lots of the hawthorns are very nice indeed, and we're very fond of them, but he's unbearable. He'll give anyone a nasty scratch if he gets half a chance. He's so spiteful." "Is it true," continued the Rainbow Cat, "that he's jealous of the other trees because he can't grow tall and big like them and reach up to the sky?" "Quite true," said the chief goblin. "He makes everyone round him miserable with his grumbling and scolding." Said the Rainbow Cat, and he folded his arms and sat lost in thought for a few minutes. "Would the petals of the hawthorn tree do to make fairy shoes of?" he said at last. "Beautifully," said the chief goblin. "But they're white." For at that time all hawthorn blossom was white, both in fairyland and everywhere else. "Quite true," said the Rainbow Cat. "Can you lend me a mandolin?" "Yes, I think I can," said the goblin, and he ran off and came back very soon with a beautiful mandolin, all inlaid with silver and ivory and mother of pearl. "Thank you," said the Rainbow Cat. "I think that in half an hour or so I shall be able to let you have all the rose-colored petals you want." And he hung the mandolin round his neck and set off into the forest. Presently he came to the Wishy Glen, sat down a little way off from the hawthorn tree where its thorns could not possibly touch him, tuned up his mandolin, and began to sing this little song. "The oak tree raises his arms on high, the pine tree reaches up to the sky. The slender birch is a lady fair, the poplar has a most elegant air. But tell me, oh tell me now, who is this, small and stunted and all amiss? Who can he be, oh who can he be, the squat little odd little strange little tree?" It wasn't very kind of the Rainbow Cat, but the hawthorn tree was a very disagreeable fellow, you must remember, and nobody could ever do anything to punish him because everyone was so afraid of his sharp thorns. Anyway, by the time the Rainbow Cat had got to the end of the first verse, the hawthorn tree was very angry. He could hardly contain himself, and he trembled all over with the temper he was in. The cat hardly looked at him, but went cheerfully on with his song. This was the second verse. "The elm tree stands like a stately king, the leaves of the alder dance and sing. My lady beech is a courtly dame, the chestnut's lamps are a shining flame. But tell me, who can he be, that scarcely reaches up to their knee? Hoary of head and crooked of limb, what on earth is the matter with him? The hawthorn tree had grown more and more furious as the song went on. The rainbow cat finished up with a beautiful trill when he got to "the matter with him," but the hawthorn tree was in no mood to admire his fine singing. So great was his rage that he grew pinker and pinker and pinker, and he shook so violently that all his petals were shaken down. They fell all round him like a shower of rosy rain. The rainbow cat waited no longer. He ran off as hard as he could to the chief of the goblins, still singing as he went, and told him that he would find all the stuff he wanted in the Weeshy Glen. So the queen got the rose-colored shoes after all, and the tree goblins were most grateful to the rainbow cat, and begged him to stay with them as long as he liked. But he thanked them and said he must continue his travels. They wanted to load him with presents, but all he would take was a little bottle of water from the magic well. This water has fairy powers. If you rub it on your eyes, you can see through stone walls, which is sometimes very convenient, and the rainbow cat was quite pleased to have some. They also insisted that he should keep the mandolin. This he finally consented to do, and ever since that time, there have always been pink hawthorn trees as well as white. The third adventure of the rainbow cat. When the rainbow cat left the land of the tree goblins, he traveled for some time until he came to a delightful country called the Bountiful Land. It was a marvelous country. There were deep forests there, and great meadows full of the loveliest flowers, such as only grow in gardens in other countries. The sky was nearly always blue, and the people who lived in that land were happy and contented. That is to say, they would have been but for one thing. In the very middle of the country, there was a great castle built high upon a rock, and in this castle, so the inhabitants of the place told the rainbow cat, there lived a cruel and wicked giantess who tyrannized over the people and constantly took away their goods, sometimes even their children. The rainbow cat did not meet with anyone who had actually seen the giantess face to face, but terrible tales were told of her doings and of her horrible appearance. She was 3 times the height of an ordinary man, it was said. Her hair was like knotted ropes. Her eyes flamed fire. When she blew her nose, the sound was like thunder. When she sneezed, forests swayed as beneath a hurricane. When she stamped her foot, whole villages collapsed. Besides being a giantess, she was reported to be able to work magic, and that frightened the people more than anything else. On dark nights, she would come down from her castle, they told him, in a chariot drawn by 6 dragons, and when the people heard the noise of it, they fled into their houses and locked the doors and barred the windows. From within, they could hear their barns and granaries being ransacked, and the opening of the doors of sheds and stables, whence their best cattle and horses were carried off. But sometimes a great voice would be heard shouting in the dark, "Throw out your treasures, or I will take your children." Then the terrified people opened their windows and threw out their treasures in fear and trembling. And notices would mysteriously appear in the villages, threatening that unless certain things were delivered up at the castle gates, the giantess would come down and take a terrible revenge. The things were conveyed up the rocky path by terrified villagers, who left them in front of the gates as commanded. They always came back with most alarming stories of what they had observed. One man had seen the giantess's shoes being cleaned by a servant in the courtyard. They were as big, he said, as a hay wagon. Another was so frightened by the sight of her washing hanging out on the line that he ran all the way home and did not get over it for weeks. But the worst thing of all was that children who had wandered a little way from home disappeared and never came back. Others who escaped would tell how an enormous cloaked figure had suddenly sprung out from behind a tree, seized one of their comrades, and made off into the woods. The thing had grown so bad that people dare not let their children out of their sight for a moment, and they were growing so afraid of the visits of the giantess that all happiness was rapidly vanishing out of the land. The fame of the rainbow cat's wisdom had already reached this country, and the people were delighted to see him and implored him to come to their assistance. The rainbow cat felt that this was a very serious matter indeed, but he was exceedingly sorry for the people and promised to do all he could to help them. So on the evening of the second day after his arrival, he took his little bag, which contained, among other things, the lightning which the thunder giant had given him, and the bottle of fairy water from the tree goblin land, and quietly set off for the castle of the giantess. He said nothing of his purpose to the kind folk with whom he was staying. He knew it would only make them fearfully anxious. He just said he was going out for a little walk in order to think the matter over. He climbed lightly and softly up the rocky path until he came right under the castle walls. There were 2 immense stone towers, one at each end of the castle, and from the high chimney of one of them, great clouds of evil-looking smoke were pouring forth, green and purple and black. "Aha," said the rainbow cat to himself. "That's where she's busy at her horrible tricks, is it?" So he sat down outside the tower, opened his bag, and dabbed his eyes with water from his little bottle, so that he was able to see right through the wall into the inside of the tower. To his great astonishment, he saw no giantess, but a very nasty-looking old wizard with a long gray beard and an enormously tall hat, who sat in a large room in front of a great open fire. All manner of strange and terrible-looking things hung upon the walls of the room, or were stowed away in cupboards, and the floor and tables were piled with books of magic. A great bunch of keys hung from the girdle of the wizard, who was busily stirring something which was bubbling over the fire in a big black pot, from which came the smoke that the rainbow cat had noticed pouring from the chimney. The firelight shone on the labels of the keys, so that the rainbow cat was able to read what was written on them. Gold chest, silver chest, jewel chest, giantess's room, prisoner's room, giantess's garden. These were some of the names he read on the labels, and he began to understand things a little better. But he thought he would make a few more investigations. So he picked up his little bag and walked softly off to the other end of the castle, sat down on the ground at the foot of the tower there, and again bathed his eyes with fairy water. This time he found himself looking into a big room of children. They were all very busy. Some of them were sorting strange-looking herbs. Some of them were grinding queer substances with heavy stones. Some of them were anxiously measuring out liquids drop by drop from one bottle into another. They all looked pale and tired. They did not laugh and talk over their work as one would expect children to do. And then the door of the room opened, and in walked who but the giantess herself? But imagine the surprise of the rainbow cat upon discovering that, although she was indeed immensely tall, she was otherwise by no means a terrible-looking person, but had, On the contrary, a sweet and charming face and beautiful golden hair. The children all came running up to her as soon as she appeared, and seemed delighted to see her. She bent down and lifted some of them up into her arms, and was so gentle and sweet with them all, that it was a joy to see her. The Rainbow Cat lost no further time. He took his mandolin, and sitting there at the foot of the tower, he began playing a little tune. He daren't play very loud, for fear the wizard should hear him in the other tower. But fortunately, the wind was in the right direction, and in any case, he felt pretty certain that the wizard was too much taken up with his enchantments to pay attention to anything else. But the giantess heard, for of course giantesses have very much larger ears than ordinary people and hear much better. And she put her head out of the window and saw the Rainbow Cat sitting there in the dusk, and asked him who he was and what he was doing. "I am a friend," said the Rainbow Cat. "Help me to come up." So the giantess let down her ribbon waist belt with the bag she kept her handkerchief in tied to the bottom of it, and this was so large that the Rainbow Cat was easily able to get into it together with his precious bag and mandolin. The giantess hauled him up to the window sill and asked him to come in and sit down and tell her what he was doing there and all about himself, for she saw that he was no ordinary creature. And when he had explained to her why he was there and what he had learnt in the Bountiful Country, she told him her own tale. How the wicked magician had stolen her away from home when she was quite young, and had brought her to this castle, and how he kept her shut up, while with his magic spells he did all sorts of evil things. "I know the people think it is all my doing," said the poor giantess. "He can turn an old wash tub and 6 beans into a chariot drawn by flaming dragons, and when he flies out he wears a great cloak over his tall hat, so that everyone takes him for me. He makes these poor children help him in his wicked work, and keeps them prisoners just as he does me. He does not even give us enough to eat. If we are not soon rescued, we shall all die. He grows worse every day." Big tears fell from the giantess's eyes. Each one made a little pool where it fell. "Don't cry," said the Rainbow Cat. "All will yet be well. My magic is stronger than his. When once I get at him, I'll soon finish him off. Will you take me to him?" But the giantess was afraid. She said she dare not disturb him. "Besides," she said, "he would never let you in. He is so suspicious." "It's got to be done somehow," said the Rainbow Cat, "if you're to be set free." He sat softly strumming on his mandolin and thinking, and suddenly the giantess had an idea. "He loves music," she said. "He says it helps his brain to work. If you could pretend to be a wandering musician—" The Rainbow Cat leapt with joy. "The very thing, my dear," he said. "Have you by any chance got a peacock's feather to lend me?" This the giantess was able to provide. "Thank you very much," said the Rainbow Cat. "You will see, in an hour's time, you will all be free. Goodbye for the present." He was so excited that he jumped clean out of the window, mandolin, bag, and all. But he was quite all right. You know, even ordinary cats are supposed to always fall on their feet, and of course a fairy cat. When he reached the ground, he wrapped himself in his cloak, pulled his hat well over his ears, and stuck the peacock's feather in the front of it. "Now I look just like a wandering musician," he said, and he went boldly up to the door of the wizard's tower and pulled the bell. The magician himself came to the door, but he opened it only the tiniest little bit. "Who are you, and what do you want?" he said in a very gruff voice. "I am a poor wandering musician," said the Rainbow Cat. "May I come in and give you a tune?" The wizard looked at him suspiciously. "What have you got in that bag?" he asked, giving it a kick with his foot so that the bundle of lightning made a rattling noise. "I've got all the major and minor keys in there," said the Rainbow Cat. "A bunch of them. That's what makes such a rattle, but I can't do without them." "Sing me a song," said the wizard, "and then I'll see whether I'll let you in or not." So the Rainbow Cat sat down on the doorstep and sang his little song, and the wizard stood just inside the door and listened. The Song of the Goose. There once was a goose who lived on a green, gold was his beak and his feathers were clean. A handsomer creature there never was seen, hey diddle ho, never was seen. He lived on a green and he waddled about, for he said, to be sure, I don't want to get stout. And anyway, exercise keeps off the gout, hey diddle ho, keeps off the gout. "I don't think much of that song," said the wizard. "The next verse is very good," said the Rainbow Cat, "but I'm not going to sing it out here in the cold night air. I shall ruin my voice." "Well, come in," said the wizard, for he wanted to hear the end of the song, and he let the Rainbow Cat in. But no sooner were they inside the wizard's room than the Rainbow Cat opened his bag and pulled out the bundle of lightning and let it loose all over the place. You never heard such a commotion. Meanwhile, he threw off his cloak, leapt upon the table, and stood there with his hair all standing on end and his eyes darting green and blue fire, while the lightning flashed all round him and round the terrified wizard, who threw himself down on his knees, crying, "Mercy, mercy," for he had never seen anything like it before, and he was anyway but a cowardly creature at heart. Presently, the wizard's attendants came running to see what was the matter. They dare not come into the room, but stood trembling in the doorway. "Tie him up," commanded the Rainbow Cat in a great loud voice. The attendants were not at all fond of their master, but in any case they were so frightened of the strange and terrible creature on the table that they did not dare to disobey. So the wizard was tied to the table, and the Rainbow Cat took all his wicked books and his pots and pans and the rest of his nasty paraphernalia and threw them out of the window onto the ground below, where they were burnt later on in a great bonfire. By this time the news had spread all over the castle, and presently the giantess came in, with the children trooping behind her. The wizard had grown black in the face with rage. He knew that even if he were set free, he would be utterly powerless, for he had lost all his magic books, and he was truly rather a stupid wizard and could do absolutely nothing without them. As a matter of fact, the gentle giantess didn't want him to be punished, and in the end he was conducted to the borders of the country and threatened with instant death if ever he returned. But that, of course, was later. You can imagine what excitement there was in the land when the Rainbow Cat appeared the next day, walking down the road from the castle, with the giantess by his side, and all the children running in front, and the wicked magician led behind in chains. The Rainbow Cat, having finished his task, soon bade his friends good-bye and set out once more on his travels. The giantess made him a present of the gold ring which she wore on her little finger. He would take nothing else. He wore it as a collar round his neck, where it was always greatly admired. She herself soon became a great favorite among the people of the bountiful land. They loved her dearly and were very proud of her. But she always had to be very careful not to sneeze or stamp. People even came from other countries to see her, so that in the end it grew quite embarrassing. But in time, a giant who had heard much of her beauty and gentleness traveled all the way from Giantland to visit her, and he married her and took her away to his own home. Her trousseau took some making, I can tell you. All the women in the district sewed at it for 6 months, and even then she was able to have only 6 of everything. The fourth adventure of the Rainbow Cat. By this time, the Rainbow Cat was getting a little tired of traveling about, and decided that he would go home and have a good rest after his many exertions. But on the way back, he had to pass through the Ever-After country, and the people who lived there were most pressing in their requests that he should spend a little time with them. The Ever-After country is inhabited by all the fairy tale and nursery rhyme people who go to live there when their adventures are over. Cinderella and her prince have a beautiful castle there, where the glass slipper is kept on a red velvet cushion in a little gilt cabinet, and shown to distinguished visitors. Cinderella never had another pair. She said they were very uncomfortable, and of course she was always afraid someone might tread on her toes. Her 2 disagreeable sisters have a little house of their own. They have taken to gardening and keep bees and chickens, and are altogether immensely improved, so that everybody is quite fond of them. They are rather sensitive about their past, and are both, alas, a little lame, because, as you will remember, they cut pieces off their feet in order to make them smaller. Snow White, too, lives in a castle with her husband. The 7 dwarfs have a fine carpenter's shop on the estate, where they are kept very busy indeed. They make the most lovely little chairs and tables for Snow White's children, and do most of the work of that kind required by the dwellers in the Ever-After land. Red Riding Hood and her grandmother have a pretty cottage close to that of Cinderella's sisters. Red Riding Hood often runs in to have a chat with them, and they are very kind about sending in honey and eggs for the old lady. Of course, there are many, many more people. Jack the Giant Killer, who has grown rather fat and lazy, but loves to talk about all his great fights. Little Miss Muffet, who is still a bit afraid of spiders. Boy Blue, Mother Hubbard, Aladdin. It would take me all day to mention half of them, but they are all there. Not one is missing. The Rainbow Cat stayed with Fatima, Bluebeard's last wife, who lives with the 2 brothers who saved her life by their valor. As usual, the Rainbow Cat was most kindly welcomed and was introduced to all the important people in the place. They were always delighted to see strangers, as sometimes they feel that things are a little dull after the exciting adventures many of them have been through. On the 3rd day after his arrival, he was invited to a great banquet at the palace of the Queen of Hearts. It was a most wonderful banquet. The Rainbow Cat wore his best bow, his dancing shoes, and the gold collar which the giantess had given him. He took his mandolin with him. It had been most useful to him on several occasions, and it seemed a pity to leave it behind. He met a number of friends at the party. Puss in Boots, for instance, and the pussy cat who went to London to visit the Queen. Dick Whittington's cat was there too, but he gave himself great airs. It seems it wasn't really quite certain whether he was a fairy tale cat at all. Some people thought he was real. It was silly of him to be so stuck up about it, but it only amused the Rainbow Cat. They were about halfway through the banquet when there was a slight pause. The meat course was finished, and everybody was waiting for the sweets. At that moment, a servant came quietly in and whispered to the queen. She became deadly pale and half rose in her seat. "What is the matter, your majesty?" said the Rainbow Cat, who sat in the place of honor at her right hand. "He's done it again," said the queen in a low, horrified whisper, sinking weakly down again into her chair. "Who has done what?" said the Rainbow Cat. "The knave stolen the tarts," said the queen with an agonized look. "They're nowhere to be found. It's all my fault. He begged so hard to be taken on again that I gave him another chance. Oh, why did I trust him?" "Isn't there anything else?" asked the Rainbow Cat. "Nothing ready," replied the queen. "You see, they're very special tarts. I make them myself. Everyone thinks so much of them. What shall I do?" "Don't worry," said the Rainbow Cat. "Send round to all the pastry cooks for anything they have ready, and meanwhile I'll sing a song to fill up the time." The queen was much relieved at this suggestion, and gave orders that messengers should be dispatched immediately to buy up all the available tarts in the place. Meanwhile, the master of ceremonies was bidden to announce that their distinguished visitor, the Rainbow Cat, had kindly promised to sing a song, and wished to know whether the guests would like to hear it at this moment or later on. This was a very clever idea, for of course people were bound in politeness to say they wished to hear the song immediately. Thereupon the Rainbow Cat took his mandolin and prepared to sing, the whole company being requested to join in the chorus after each verse. They were all delighted with this suggestion, and they all sang, whether they had any voice or not. They enjoyed it so much that they quite forgot that they hadn't finished the banquet. At least they almost forgot. Here is the song. The rhyme of the gnome with a scolding wife. Once upon a time, when guinea pigs had tails, and people talked in rhyme, and rivers ran on rails, there lived a little gnome who'd such a scolding wife. At last he ran away from home, he couldn't stand the life. Now join me on the chorus.
There lived a little gnome who'd such a scolding wife. At last he ran away from home, he couldn't stand the life.
She scolded all day long, from morning until night, and she was never wrong, and he was never right. Oh, she could bake and bile, and she could clean and mend, but since she scolded all the while, he left her in the end.
Oh, she could bake and bile, and she could clean and mend, but since she scolded all the while, he left her in the end.
He thought he'd found a way at last to be at peace, but still to his dismay, his troubles did not cease. He didn't like his meals, his washing wasn't right, his socks were always out at heels, his shirt's a fearful sight.
He didn't like his meals, his washing wasn't right, his socks were always out at heels, his shirt's a fearful sight.
By the end of the third verse, the queen was looking very strained and anxious, and the Rainbow Cat himself was beginning to feel rather nervous. His song had only 4 verses, and he wasn't at all sure that he would be asked to sing another. He was afraid that people would remember their unfinished dinner as soon as he stopped. So he began the 4th verse very slowly, but before he got halfway through, he saw 3 servants standing between the curtains of the great doorway of the banqueting hall, with enormous golden dishes piled up with most magnificent-looking tarts. "My tarts," he heard the queen murmur in an excited voice, and then he knew that everything was well. So he finished his song at a great pace, and the last chorus was sung with much enthusiasm, for the other guests had also seen the waiting tarts, and were eager to begin on them. This is the last verse of his song. Assuredly, thought he, his temper is a curse, and yet it seems to me that this is rather worse. So home he went once more, in philosophic mood, and though his wife still vexed him sore, he did enjoy his food.
So home he went once more, in philosophic mood, and though his wife still vexed him sore, he did enjoy his food.
The song was very much applauded, and everyone then fell upon the tarts with an appetite which the slight delay had pleasantly renewed. It turned out afterwards that it was all a mistake about the knave. The head cook had put the tarts away on the top shelf of the larder for safety, but he was a poet as well as a cook, and just before the moment arrived when the tarts should have been served up, a perfectly beautiful little verse came into his head, and he rushed off to a quiet spot to write it down, quite confident that the undercook would be able to look after the rest of the banquet. And that's how it came about that suspicion fell upon the poor knave, for when the tarts could not be found, everyone naturally supposed that he had stolen them again. When the cook had written down his verse and made a few little improvements in it, he returned to the kitchen and found everything in an uproar because of the missing tarts. He arrived in the nick of time, for the messengers were returning almost empty-handed from the pastry cook's shops. They had made very little pastry that day because they knew that everyone would be at the banquet and that they would have no sale for their wares. Of course, later on, the cook had to give an explanation of his carelessness, and he was removed from his position. But as his verses were even better than his dishes, he was made court poet instead, and he liked that much better, though he occasionally lent a hand in the kitchen when they were very busy. The queen was most grateful to the Rainbow Cat for his timely help, and every year, on his birthday, she sent him a box of tarts made by her own hands, especially for him. He stayed only a day or two in the ever-after-land after the banquet. Then he packed up his belongings, bade goodbye to all his kind friends, and set off for his home. He was glad to be back in his own little house, and delighted all his friends with his accounts of his travels. But he had no intention of settling down forever, and I hope to be able some day to tell you more of the adventures that befell him upon his further journeyings. The end.